How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of your favorite swimbait podcast, Scales and Tails, episode 148 this morning, this evening, whenever you guys are listening. We're recording this in the evening, just got home from work, and we're joined by a gentleman who you guys are probably familiar with his work, maybe not necessarily his page or his social media stuff, but you guys have definitely seen his work if you guys are in the swimbait world. And he's been posting a lot of calico casting catches lately, and like I don't know. I have no knowledge on what he's doing, but it looks like the kelp fields. I don't know if that's the correct term or not, but it looks like a kelp field, whatever that is. That's what I would think it would be.
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Is a kelp field?
Yeah. I mean, kelp forest. Yep. Same thing.
Perfect. Perfect. Man, I'm pretty spot on for never fishing saltwater before.
Yeah.
But we're joined by Mr. Scott, dude. We
Scott Wyss. Yeah.
Wyss, dude. We talked about it. I had it in my head how I said it like all day, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's how you say it. But so we're joined. His Instagram is Bows and Arrows 43, and if you guys are watching this on YouTube, you'll see over his right shoulder, his little banner right there, and it's very telling. Like I know you guys have seen the Toxic shirts, the new Toxic ABS line of stuff. You can just kind of see his work, and you just kind of know it's Scott. So I guess Scott, introduce yourself, and then we'll get right into it, man.
Yeah. Yeah. My brand is Bows and Arrows. But my day job mainly is I'm a adjunct professor at San Diego State University. And I guess coming up this fall semester, it'll be my 20th year teaching graphic design at San Diego State. And I teach a bunch of different classes, logo branding design, and then more recently, I have a screen printing studio class that I teach up there also.
Man, that is awesome. That's like all stuff right up my alley. You want to hear the crazy thing is you've been teaching graphic design for a little bit shorter than I've been on this green earth of ours.
That's crazy.
It's awesome, man. But so the branding, like the branding logo and the screen printing stuff, that's super cool. I didn't even know that like the screen printing thing was something that like you could learn at college. That's actually really, really cool to hear.
Yeah, it's interesting, with everything being so digital, I thought that it would just, print was slowly dying, that it would just something that was just going to go away or, would be taken over by more digital media. But the next generation of students, they really are interested in things that are more tactile and they just love screen printing and more of the hands-on stuff. So it's this resurgence a little bit of that class. I always have a full class with students on the wait list trying to get in. So
Wow. Man, that's awesome. That's super cool to hear. I've got to know, is your graphic design stuff based around like Adobe Suites, all the Adobe stuff?
yeah, so Adobe Illustrator I use primarily for doing all my vector graphics and drawing, and then InDesign for page layout and Photoshop for a little bit of editing, and then more recently for all my video editing I use Premiere Rush. I use the more basic version of Premiere. It's just easier for me.
Yeah, that's what I use too is Rush. I don't have to have any crazy cuts. I always tell myself if like the angles and the cinematic shots are there, you don't need crazy transitions. You don't need crazy, whatever you might need using Premiere or using DaVinci or all these other stuff. It's just kind of just the meat and beans. Somebody's gonna watch my video, they're gonna like what they're seeing. They don't have to get blown away. It's not a A24 movie or something like that.
Yeah, seriously. I go in there and like I think the first time I used Premiere Rush, I like when I opened a program, it had like in Adobe like a little preview of like here's what to expect, and I figured it out from that.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, I could just here's my transition, dissolve or fade to black, and then from there I was like, all right, this is easy.
Yeah. Yeah. So for anybody who's not familiar, is a person who's been doing InDesign and Illustrator, those might majority Adobe stuff for pretty much everything you guys see from Scales and Tails. It is an SOB. You have to really, really, there's more times than not if you go through my search history, it's just how to do this on Illustrator, how to do this on InDesign. It's a very fecal beast. And it's if you guys are not familiar, it is very hard. It takes a very long time to kind of work your way around it and figure out a work way that that really makes it easy for you. But you've been doing it for a while. You probably know all the keystrokes, and you can zoom around probably a lot of the Adobe Face stuff, can't you?
Yeah, it's crazy. I think when I started in college, it was like Adobe Illustrator 5. It was
Wow.
like so long
Yeah.
ago. And then yeah, so it's interesting of learning like I mean Illustrator is one that I'm like the most proficient in. And I think the hardest tool in Illustrator is understanding how to use the pen tool.
Yeah.
And then once you can figure out the pen tool, you could basically draw anything you want.
Mhm.
And I think the biggest advantage of Illustrator is that it's a vector graphic versus a pixel graphic.
Mhm.
So everything in Photoshop is pixel based.
Yep.
So you have scalability issues where it will look blurred out or fuzzy if you don't have the right resolution. But vector based, I mean, it's all through math equations. So once you draw something, you can make it the size of a billboard, or it could be the size of a button and you won't lose quality.
Yeah.
So
So awesome, man. So I guess we'll start. So Bows and Arrows is his Instagram 43, and that's kind of like the branding behind like everything he does. You guys, like I said, you've done stuff for Caesar, you've done stuff for LDC. Did you do something for Underground too, or am I just thinking that's something else?
I'm currently working with Chris Purcell right
Okay.
now for on a project that hasn't come out yet. Hopefully late this summer that will come out. I did some stuff for Mike Gilbert too from
Okay.
Working Class Zero. And that happened like right during COVID times where like we were getting started with stuff and then it was just kind of bad timing. We had stuff done and then it kind of got shelved and that one never ended up, coming out. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I've got 3 words for you. Lake Pro Tackle. Lake Pro Tackle has all the gear you need to be ready to have a successful day on the water. Friends of the podcast receive 10% off your orders while using code SCALES at checkout. Checking out with code SCALES not only saves you guys some money, but it also helps me host more giveaways to give back to you guys, the listeners. On their website, you can find exclusive and rare swim baits, JDM and BFS products, and of course, conventional tackle. I can't forget to mention Lake Pro Tackle gets the monthly throwback shop colors at the beginning of every month. Also, orders over $50 get free shipping, including rods. So do me a favor and remember to use code SCALES at checkout to save 10% at lakeprotackle.com. The vast majority of double-digit bass caught in Mexico are caught out of 2 lakes, Lake Bacharach and Lake El Salto. Josh Daniels Pro Bass Adventures is the only outfitter in Mexico with lodges on both of these trophy lakes. With a fleet of Ranger boats at Lake El Salto and Live Scope Plus at Lake Bacharach, Pro Bass Adventures has the best equipped guides and boats in Mexico. Better call Pro Bass 480-491-9300 or probassadventures.com. We are Mexico Fishing. Staring at that peanut butter jelly like a largemouth bass staring at a dollar store worm? Then it's time to upgrade your snackuation. Meat Crafters' line of handmade small batch pre-sliced salamis and our charcuterie make the perfect base for your weekend snackle box. Fill a Plano 3600 with an assortment of Meat Crafters' old style salami and charcuterie and you're sure to become the boat ramp champ. Listeners of the show can use code SCALES and SLICES at checkout on meatcrafters.com to save 20% off your cart. The code can be used as many times as you want so you'll never run out of fuel for your pursuit of giants. So the next time you reach into your fridge to load up your boat cooler, skip to fish food and grab the stack of Meat Crafters pre-sliced packs. They're guaranteed to exceed your PB. Your favorite swimbait podcast is now proudly sponsored by Leviathan Rods. Leviathan Rods is a Texas-based fishing rod company that's handcrafted and uses high-end, made-in-the-USA rod blanks. Every sale from Leviathan helps support foster youth and their families. With Leviathan rods, you're not only going to feel a difference, but you're going to help make a difference too. Friends of the show will also get 20% off their rod purchases by using code SCALES20 at checkout. So whether you're fishing a depth 250 or a square bill, make sure you're using the best rod choice out there, Leviathan rods. So when I see your work, I always think of the one you did for Caesar with the bait and it's got all the screw locks and it's got the knife and it's got everything on there. I mean, that is like that is your work. Anybody can see that if they're familiar with you or after this episode and they'll be like, that's Scott's work right there. And that style you have, like I said, is just it just sticks out. There's kind of like the graphic design that guys are familiar with, maybe not even necessarily graphic design. It's more like the image stuff, like the logo designs that I was using or other guys use, super colorful, traditional style stuff. That stuff is really cool, but I feel like it gets kind of washed away. Like once you've seen a couple, you're kind of they're very similar and you kind of just get used to it. But when you see something that's like very minimal, like your work, it kind of just clicks and it just looks so good. You look at it and you're like, man, this is like the Porsche logo, or it's just something completely different that we don't necessarily see all the time in the whole swim bait realm of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, there's this one artist and illustrator, his name's Charlie Harper, and he's from like the 60s, but his illustration style, it's very minimalistic and stripped down. And he always had this quote of like, I'm not concerned if I'm drawing like a bird with like every scale and every detail of the feathers, just that you can know that it's a wing.
Right. Yeah.
So I think my style, it's more of, I call it like a graphic translation,
Mhm.
where it's not really a full-blown illustration, but I try and look at the essence of what it is and then make it as bold and graphic as possible.
That's awesome.
um, and I think the other thing for me is that I do my own screen printing.
Mhm.
So like from a printmaking standpoint, because I have to output the film, make the screen, and physically print everything,
Yeah.
like thicker stroke lines and like bolder graphics, they just print way easier.
Mhm.
So I try and help myself, and that's why a lot of my design is that much bolder and more graphic, so that in the end I just have an easier time printing it.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of want to talk about the screen printing thing because that's pretty cool and people aren't necessarily familiar with what goes into making the screens and stuff, but we'll put that like towards the agenda for after this big question. So you said that you've been teaching for about 20 years now, going on 20 years here later this year. Where did the whole design creative aspect start for you? Because that's like the core, like your core memory of it. What was like a role model that got you into it, or what was like your first thought that this was something that you were really interested in?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like a two-part answer. So, I mean, the first one is really just kind of growing up as a kid. I was, super into skateboarding. So, like, my earliest memory really was going into the skate shop and then looking up on the wall. And I basically just picked the board graphic off the wall with like the coolest graphic.
Yeah.
And that was like, I didn't even know who the pro was or anything was in there. I was just solely on just visual. This graphic looks cool, so I'm buying this board. And that really kind of ended up being, it was my first board that I got was Jason Jesse was the pro skater. It was called the Sun God graphic. And later on, I did some research, and the illustrator's name was Jim Phillips, and he did all the Santa Cruz skateboard graphics for years,
Okay.
and graphics for like Rob Roskop and Nodis. And so I don't know, I was just really influenced, heavily by the skateboard graphics. And I just later on just fell in love with certain skaters like Mark Gonzalez and Neil Blender. They started doing their own graphics for their pro boards. And I just really like that whole DIY ethos of, all right, the pro skater, they're making their graphics for their brand. And I don't know, it just really resonated with
Yeah.
me. Um, but I guess the second part to that would be my other influence. I think when I got out of art school, the design firm I worked for at the time, they sent us, to different design lectures and conferences. And there was a designer called Aaron Draplin, and he's famous. I don't know if you ever seen, like, they're called like field notebooks. Have you ever seen those before? They're like these little 4x6 notebooks.
Like one of these.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Carry one
So
every day.
yeah, yeah. He's got this whole thing of like, write it down so you don't forget it. And I always carry those field notebooks. And he did this lecture series. And with the lecture series, he had this section in there on, he called Going Junkin'. And he would, as he traveled and toured, he would go to different like garage sales, state sales, and he would just collect all this like interesting, Americana design, from like old maps to, printed brochures. And yeah, so about like 10 years ago, after watching that lecture, I was like super inspired. And in San Diego, we have a thing called like a swap meet.
Yeah.
And then I'd also go to like different garage sales and estate sales, and I would just start collecting anything that was like fishing related, like old matchbooks, that had like cool outboard covers, and fishing catalogs from like the 60s, and old packaging, and that's where I draw a lot of my inspiration from now. Just going out collecting stuff, and just I'm so visual, so I love having all that surrounding me.
Mhm.
And then I'll look at like colors and illustration style and just how they're doing graphics from back then, and that's another big influence that's I have.
Yeah. When you were younger and you picked out that skate deck and stuff, I guess, did you ever like have an interest in drawing, or was it more so when you got older and kind of got into like the design aspect? Like, were you sketching and stuff when you were younger, or?
Yeah, I was doing a lot of drawing, like traditional stuff. You know, I didn't really even know, like, like when I was in like grade school and like high school, like I didn't know you can go to college for art.
Mhm.
Like, and those are classes I did well in. And then my dad's like, you should go to art school. And I'm like, that's a thing. And they're
Yeah.
like, yeah. And I was like, oh, really? Like sick. So, they were like, well, you need a portfolio to get in. And I'm like, well, I don't have a portfolio. So I ended up, starting to take art classes, just traditional like painting. I did stuff in pastel, figure drawing, all the traditional ones to create my portfolio. And then once I got into college, I took, a foundation year with, painting, sculpture, everything else. And then eventually found like, oh, I really like graphic design. And then I just focused on that as my major. But yeah, I've been drawing since I was a kid. Yeah.
That's awesome. So I cannot draw. I try. I send all my sketches to the guy who does my artwork, and they're okay. They're not great. That's actually why I had that field book, is because I got it and I was like, I'm gonna draw something else. I'm gonna come up with a fake brand, and I'm gonna make a logo for him every single day. And now that's kind of slowly turned into a to-do list every day as well. But I'm like, I'm just gonna teach myself how to draw, or just gonna cut my teeth trying. And now it's more so like I like the graphic design side of things, where I'm more proficient of jumping on the computer and doing something with keystrokes rather than actually drawing something physically, which is, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people kind of are the other way. Like they'll get into drawing and then do it vice versa. Because I feel like everybody that I've ever talked to or ever seen, they can make mock-up logos or whatever it may be, and then they can turn around and do it on paper too with a pencil or with a pen. And I'm just like, man, I just, for whatever reason, I cannot wrap my mind around the whole like physical drawing side of things. That's like my biggest weakness with the quote unquote graphic design stuff I do.
Yeah. The interesting thing with drawing is it's something that if you keep doing it over and over again, you can get better and better at it. There are definitely, I remember in college there were people that were like illustration majors, and I was in class with them, and like anything in the world, like they just had raw talent, like
Yeah.
where you were just like, wow, they're like a whole other class above me. But similar to you, I was like, I am not the best illustrator, but if I photograph something or I see something, I can strip down the essence and draw it in like Adobe Illustrator or vectorize it. And then that just became my style.
Heck yeah. So you had mentioned that you had kind of started going to the swap meets and stuff, and kind of getting into the whole, or like picking up fishing stuff here and there. So we kind of know your graphic design background now. What was your fishing background, and when did that start?
Well, my dad, I mean, I'm originally from the East Coast, from New Jersey.
Okay.
So my dad, he's a big surf fisherman for striped bass.
Mhm.
And we have a beach house along the coastline, and we're like maybe like 5 houses from the ocean. So my dad, when I was growing up as like a kid, he would get up at 5 in the morning, but I was so little, I was like, I hated getting up early, so I could never get up that early. But he would get up in his waders, he would go up and fish, and every so often when he'd be striped bass fishing, he would get into like a blitz. Are you familiar with like
Oh,
striped bass
yeah.
blitzes?
Yep.
Yeah. So basically, like the bait fish, we call them bunker or menhaden.
Yep, yep,
You know, the
bunker, yeah.
striped bass would come in and they would just trap either on the sandbar, maybe on like a jetty or right against the wash, that school of bait fish. And usually it would last a half hour, sometimes longer, maybe an hour. So he would come back home in his waders
Mhm.
and he'd just shake me up in the bed. And he'd be like, they're blitzing the beach. And I'd be like, all right. And then I'd just get dressed really quick and I'd run up and we would fish, until like, I don't know, my arms would fall off.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my earliest introduction into fishing. And I was like super into it. I would go with him all the time.
Man, that's awesome. That's awesome that you got to experience like that sort of fishing at such a young age. And like that your dad was that in tune to like getting you out there that he would run home to wake you up to go out there and experience that. That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool that he wasn't like selfish because, that blitz, I mean, they could be gone in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
He's kind of like gambling, like, it doesn't happen all the time, like, all right, well, I'm gonna go home and get him,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he's into fishing even like more than like I am. Like I think this year he turns 87 and he still surf fishes all the time. But I mean, what's really cool, and I take a lot of inspiration from him, is that since he's been fishing since like I think 65, like early 60s,
Mhm.
every single striped bass he's caught since the 60s, he's got like a 3-ring binder. He's written down every fish he's caught. And
Nice.
he's written down in this like loose leaf, binder,
Mhm.
the date, the time, the tide, like weather conditions, like what direction the wind was, the lure, reel retrieve. And more recently, I think since like the 90s, he started doing like little drawings of like the beach and where he caught them. So like let's say like at high tide, he went up, he had a good morning. He'll go back at low tide when all the water drains out, and then he'll look at the structure like the cut of the sandbar.
Yeah.
And then he'll do a little sketch like, oh, there's a cut in the sandbar here. I cast on this angle and they hit it on this side of the sandbar and I put like a little X, and he has like all these drawings. But I don't know, it's just really sick to see since the 60s to like now, like all the fish and data he's collected.
Yeah.
And then he reviews it like every season in the fall and he just tries to connect patterns. Yeah.
Man, that's awesome. That's like literally 60 years of history right there in a 3-ring binder.
Yeah. I borrowed it one time and like scanned a bunch of pages. I was going to do something with it for him. I think I'm going to try and archive it in case he loses it or something, and maybe bind it or something together for him. But
Man, that's so cool. So after that, I guess, how did you end up in California? Did you go over there for art school and kind of stick around?
no, I went to art school in Philadelphia and UArts, and my really good friend at the time that I went to art school with was a photography major, and we ended up just driving cross country and ended up in San Diego, and we were just trying to escape like the winter one year. I
Yeah.
think I was like in my 20s, like 21 or something like that, and we were just like, let's just go there for the winter, and I ended up getting a really good design job, maybe about a month into living in San Diego.
Wow.
But that's mainly we were just trying to escape the winter just for like a season,
Mhm.
and then I ended up staying because I ended up getting a good job.
Man, that's crazy. So, when you were going through art school and stuff, were you as into fishing as you had been before? Or was that kind of put on the back burner while you were studying and doing academic stuff?
Yeah, I mean in Philadelphia, I mean I was still skating really heavily at the
Okay.
time, so I pretty much moved to Philadelphia. It was around 94 to 98, 99. If you're familiar with skating history a little bit, but that was during the Love Park days. So like I moved there primarily just to skate this one plaza,
Man.
and it was right by my art school.
Mhm.
And but my beach house was about an hour, maybe hour and a half from Philadelphia. So like on the weekends, I would go down there and I would fish, with my dad and a few of my friends. But it wasn't until I moved to California that I started fishing more.
Man, that's so cool. So you go over to California, you get your design job and stuff. Did you kind of realize that the fishing was kind of similar but different as far as like what the salt had to offer over there? Did you get into freshwater fishing in California, or kind of what was that timeline like?
Um, I mean, primarily, I think I bought my first boat in 2008, and I was surfing quite a bit. So like when I first bought my boat, honestly, I bought it just to surf. There's a few surf breaks that are on like government land that you can't set foot on and you can only get to by boat.
Hmm.
So me and my buddies, we would take our boat out and we would, go and, surf for a few hours, and then afterwards we would go fish for a little bit. And then like everything, like there just wasn't that much, the surf wasn't as consistent. So I ended up, you know, if it wasn't good surf, I would take the boat out and go fish.
Okay.
And it was like 50-50, like where I was surfing and fishing kind of equally.
Mhm.
And then eventually, like, I just ended up getting more and more into fishing, where like I stopped bringing my surfboard with me and I would just take the boat out to go fishing. And I just really got into it.
Dang. So at that point in time, was it calico fishing and stuff like it is now?
Yeah, for the most part, I live like right next to the bay. So inshore in the bay, they're like calico bass, but they're spotted bay bass.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I fished like a ton of spotted bay bass, and I was fishing like halibut and corvina in the bay, and then inshore outside in that kelp forest, I was fishing for like calico bass.
Okay. So at this point in time, were you just using like conventional stuff like paddle tails and kind of the more of the common calico stuff that guys use?
Yeah, just conventional stuff. I was just using like a lead head with like a 5 or 6 inch rubber swim bait.
Mhm.
And then we also have, a bunch of weedless swim baits in the kelp because of they're snag proof. And that's all I was pretty much fishing was lead head and the different swim baits that were, weedless.
Yeah. So sticking kind of going more towards the fishing rabbit hole right now, when did the start, or I guess when did you pick up on swim baits? Like what most guys would consider swim baits, like the hard baits or the bigger soft baits, that sort of thing. When did that kind of start?
Um, I had gone to a Fred Hall, which is like
Oh,
a
yep.
fishing convention
Exposed.
center there in
Yeah.
Del Mar. Yeah, and I was there and I was kind of walking around, and a friend of mine introduced me to this fisherman named Kevin Matson. And he's an incredible fisherman, and he does freshwater, saltwater, really well rounded. And he travels a lot too, throughout the US, and then he goes to a lot of different location and fishes like exotic species. But he had just done a trip, and this is years ago. He did a trip to Arkansas, and I think he was fishing like the White River, and he was targeting like large, huge trophy brown trout on like the game craft and on like the Sneaky Pete
Like the
G-Rat
triple
swim
trout and
bait.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and I saw his post and I was like blown away. I was like, dude, this is so sick that you're catching these brown trout on like these huge swim baits. And so we were talking about it, and I just in passing mentioned to him there's a fish that I target here called corvina, and they're really similar. I guess in Florida they have like a speckled trout.
Yep.
It's similar to it. Or on the East Coast in Jersey they have a thing called weak fish. They're just basically a sea trout. That's what they look like. They got two little fangs in the
Yeah.
front of their
Yeah.
mouth. And they're aggressive and they take down topwater, plugs. And so I just mentioned to him, I'm like, you think they would hit those like a game craft or one of those big swim baits? And he's like, I don't know, like you should try it. So I bought a game craft, a G-Rat Sneaky Pete, and then I didn't know how the swim baits were gonna hold up in the salt water. And then I even got like just an entry level little river to sea S waver.
Mm,
And then I had a friend of mine custom paint it in like a saltwater pattern.
yeah.
And the first time I went out and fished, I was just in the bay, behind my house. On my first drift, I ended up getting like a 14-inch spotted bass. on like an 8-inch glide. And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, this is crazy. Like,
Yeah.
and then that same drift, I got like a small Corvina, and then I reset my drift. And then on the second drift, I only been out for like 45 minutes. I ended up landing like a huge halibut, like a 30-inch halibut. Like it just 4 feet of water just smoked it, like white water just splashing everywhere. And I was like, from then on, I was like, whoa, I'm hooked. This is sick, like, and then I ended up putting down the conventional stuff. And I was like, well, if I'm going to learn this, I'm going to try and only bring swim baits and try and focus on that
Yeah.
and figure it out.
Man, that's awesome. What year was this if you had to kind of pick a timeline?
I think it was around like 2018.
Okay. So
Yeah.
so you got into it, you started catching these fish and having just a blast. Did you know or hear about anybody else doing stuff like this, like what you were doing, or at least like in your area?
Um, I mean, Kevin Matson was doing it for sure. I mean, if you look back, I mean, Chris Purcell,
Yep.
that does Swim Bait Underground, I mean, he also, his father, the whole family, they do like even Matt Purcell, they do a lot of saltwater fishing.
Okay.
And I noticed that, I mean, his main stuff is, freshwater largemouth, but he was catching calico bass on like the DRT K9, and so like he's been doing it for a long time too.
Man, that's so awesome. And I feel like that's something you never really see or hear about for whatever reason. I think it's so badass. I don't know why more guys don't talk about it.
Yeah, there are a handful of guys that, now definitely fish for them quite a bit,
Mhm.
and use them. And I think it's with all swim baiting, that, once you have that larger profile bait, even though like smaller fish will take it down, I mean, you go from large numbers that you're catching to maybe 2 or 3 fish a day.
Yeah.
And I think that's hard for just any fisherman in general, like
Right.
no matter what you're targeting. So um, for me, I mean, for years, I had caught the numbers, and then now I was really interested in just trying to switch and target like a bigger, better quality fish. And that's what kind of made me kind of switch over to swim baits.
Right. Yeah. So you getting into swim baits around 2018, you having success on them and stuff. Did you kind of start to peel the curtain back on the whole swim bait scene and see like how related, like how closely related it was to the skate scene that you were used to, and kind of see the niche of the art, like art graphic design stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting that you started seeing the parallels of like, it has its own, subculture
Yeah.
really. And and that's when I was younger, what really drew me to skateboarding was that it had its own scene. It had its own music, its own art, its own clothing, like everything. So yeah, I really started noticing the similarities to it. And for skating, like, Mike Gilbert, I started realizing like, oh, like a bunch of these swim bait bass fishermen, like the same mentality they took in skating, now as they're like older, like they're transitioned into like bass fishing.
Hmm.
And they look at it through like the same eyes of like, well, skating is super hard, and like to just get a trick, how many tries you have to do and the effort you have to put into it, like that was already instilled in me. Like it wasn't that big of a transition. I'm used to it being difficult or hard. So
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So I never skated or anything, but I was in snowboarding. But it's funny to see like how I've watched a lot of skateboarding videos now and docs and stuff about Thrasher and everything. But it's funny to see like how all the similarities have kind of been plucked from the skate scene and brought over to the swim bait scene. And now you have guys like myself who I couldn't even stand on a freaking skateboard. And now I know like all these guys in the swim bait scene who came from the skateboarding scene. It's really cool, and it's interesting to see all the ties that have kind of connected the two together.
yeah, no, I definitely love that. And I think that was something that was lacking in my life a little bit was, as I got older, a lot of my friends, that weren't skating as much, I wasn't skating as much, and I just lost that whole scene that I was used to. And I was starting to fish, but I didn't really have like a core group of people or a scene that I was like connecting with as much. Um, and I don't know, once I started, swim bait fishing, it's such a small community and everyone's like super cool.
Mhm.
Like I was kind of blown away. Like I didn't really think that this group of people were going to be like in person so nice and like, responsive. Yeah, so I'm like really stoked to be a part of that community.
Yeah, it's kind of cool that I mean, how many companies out there like that make baits or whatnot base their stuff like strictly off the skating scene, or they came from the skating scene, so that's kind of what they know and that's how they build their brand up, is kind of like what the skate scene was like in the 90s, and that's super cool. Like I said, I'm not too familiar with it, so I see this stuff and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And then come to find out that their logo is a play off of this skateboarding logo, or just whatever it may be. It's kind of full circle for me. Like, oh, that's really cool. And it kind of works out well because I'm like, my parents are pretty young, so I grew up listening to like the rap from the 90s and stuff. And so I kind of embody that like nonchalantly through my dad and stuff. And so it's kind of like full circle for that too, where it's like this group of guys is just realistically just a bunch of grunge guys who just are misfits essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, if you think about like the whole skate industry, it's just, like you said, like, just misfits and geeks and you know what I mean? And like they found their crew and they just ran with it. And like, um, I remember like skating, like the coolest thing is like anywhere I traveled or I went, like, you know, if I was in a town and I needed somewhere to stay and they were like, oh, you skate, like you stay with us. Like,
Yeah,
you know
like
what I mean? Like it was
automatically
just
cool.
like automatic, like, like they would just look at your shoes and they'd be like, all right, you skate, like, all right, cool, you're with us, I just thought it was like the sickest thing that we all took care of each other.
Yeah, it's kind of cool that there's that like group herd mentality. They don't even have to know your first name. Like they could look down, see what you're wearing, or kind of see the rods in the back of your truck and be like, "Oh, dude, like come hang out with us. Like we know the type of person you are." And you're automatically, it's just like you're a part of the group. You could go from one side of the country to the next, and if you find that little niche group of guys, it's crazy that you're just gonna get accepted and invited over to hang out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, like one of the other similarities too with like, skating is that the amount of time and dedication and just the effort you have to put into it to get to a certain level and the amount of like physical pain and injuries you go through it like just creates this certain respect amongst like the group to get to that level because everyone knows like how hard it is. And I think with swim bait fishing it's kind of similar, like to last and fish and catch fish and like the amount of like mental grind that you go through.
Yeah.
Um it just takes a lot of effort, so I think that there's a mutual respect for everyone.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So you're in the swim bait scene and you kind of start to see the similarities between the skate scene and kind of see that they're kind of meshed together more. So at what point in time, like, did you see maybe a hole in like the graphic design, or kind of see like, hey, this thing that I'm really well versed in kind of is like a gap that's not being filled in the swim bait scene that maybe I could kind of put my own touch to.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I for a long time I used to do a lot. I had before Instagram, when I first started doing some graphics that were more like fishing related,
Mhm.
I had like just a regular blog.
Okay.
And it was just every time I went fishing, I would take a few photographs, I'd write something small, and it really started as like a way to communicate with my dad that was 3,000 miles away. I bookmarked my blog on his little iMac,
Oh,
so it was
yeah.
like on there, and he could just every Sunday I would call him. So I'd go fish and I'd make a little blog entry, and then I'd call him on that Sunday and he'd pull up my page and then we would just talk for a few hours about fishing. And it
That's
was a
so
way, before like, iPhones and, texting photographs back and FaceTime. that I could just communicate with him and we could like share photos.
Yeah.
But as I got more into it, I started taking some data and statistics, and I started creating what I call like infographics, where you take, you know, information from that day. You know, it could be like, you know, how many casts you made, or the retrieve speed, or, you know, a map of a location. And it's created, you know, more detailed infographics, just visualizing like, you know, the data. And I got a email one day, and it was the editor of Surfer's Journal. His name is like Scott Hewlett, and he's like, "Hey, like a good friend of mine, um, you know, Brandon Hayward is starting a fishing magazine called The Bite. It's a saltwater fishing journal,
Mhm.
and we really like the infographics you're doing for the fishing stuff." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I didn't even think anyone was even like looking at it.
Yeah.
And he hired me to do like a bunch of freelance design on infographics for the magazine, and that was like my really first entry into taking like some of my infographics and some of my graphic design into the fishing industry.
Mhm.
But as far as like the swim baits go, I think when I got, you know, more and more into swim bait fishing, you know, I really respect like the amount of craft that goes into like the making of a swim bait. I
Yeah.
mean, I think when I watched one of the Roman made videos of like the wooden, I mean, the documentation, and just a lot of these garage builders,
Yeah.
like the amount of work that goes into it. I mean, even just the artistry and like the craft into airbrushing. I ended up wanting to like just make a a poster or design that like honored the swim bait maker. That was like the first one I ever did. And yeah, so I didn't think anything of it. I just I kind of made that one, and I didn't think anyone was gonna buy it, or, you know, it's such a small market. I didn't really think it was gonna go anywhere. But I think Manny Chi, he was like one of the first people that really bought a bunch of my screen printed posters.
Okay.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. What was that first design? Was that one the one you did with Caesar, or was this way before that?
That was kind of before that one.
Okay.
You know, I had some other ones. I did the one before Caesars. It was basically the same style, but it was like more of just a generic swim bait. It didn't have the
Oh,
toxic stuff.
yeah.
It was the same idea where I had the swim bait exploded view diagram, and then different tools, you know, that are made. You know, and I think it was Chris Purcell from Swim Bait Underground. He posted my video where I was like screen printing and making everything on the SU Instagram main page.
Mhm.
And I'm forever, you know, grateful to him. I mean, from that one post, um, a bunch of people bought them right from that directly.
That's awesome. That's so cool, man. So was that more like 2019, later in 2018?
Yeah, 2019, 2020. And you know, I had a bunch of time because of like COVID hit, and I had a studio set up in my garage where I could screen print, you know, there and just make stuff and film and do video. But yeah, that one really helped me quite a bit, where I don't know, it's just really interesting where, you know, I would make the print, you know, post it, I sold some, and then a lot of times when people would get the poster, if they were stoked on it, they would photograph it and then they would post it on their Instagram and
Yeah.
tag me.
Yeah.
And then that person from Nebraska, their crew people would see it. You know, it's just like this chain
Mhm.
where all of a sudden I had all these different swim bait makers like reaching out to me that I never thought it was ever going to
Yeah.
reach. And it was just really interesting to start to see the community and the people that started contacting me.
Man, that's so awesome. And you probably saw like these your posters in super nice frames hanging up like in the middle of people's living rooms, you know, where their families eat dinner at every night. And it probably was just like, wow, this is such a crazy thing. I always, and maybe you don't really feel this because you've been doing it a little bit longer, but it's always very interesting when people take like super high praise and pride, like displaying my work or getting my work. and they're just excited to have it. It's a really weird feeling, like somebody enjoys purchasing something of mine that I put so much work into. It's a crazy feeling. I always say that you can't even describe that feeling. It's just something you have to experience.
Yeah, no, I mean definitely like it's like a huge honor when someone direct message me and they photograph, like you said, it's framed and it's in their living room. Or
Mhm.
like Caesar sends me a message and he's like, dude, check out in my house. This whole wall is all your stuff.
Yeah,
Like it's a huge honor, you know? I remember the first poster I did, I got a message and someone had gifted Tomoyo from DRT my
that's so
poster,
cool. That's so cool.
and they gave it to him, and I was like so stoked. I was like, dude, this is such an honor that you bought it from me, but then you gave it to him as a gift.
Mhm.
And last year at Toxic Day 4, I got to meet Chris Purcell introduced me to Tomoyo and the
That's so
DRT
cool.
guys.
Yeah.
And I was like a little kid. Like I went over there, I was like all nervous, and he introduced me and like he's like, "Oh, I remember you. Like I have your poster." And I gave him another screen print and like he was like super honored that I gave him like an original print and like it was so cool meeting them. Yeah.
That's so cool. I got a picture when Jeff and Phoenix went 2 times ago to Japan. Phoenix and Jeff were like, "Hey, we'll take some magazines for you. You know, we'll try to hand them out." I'm like, "Cool." So gave him a couple magazines, and I get a picture at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's Kango and Tomoyo holding the magazines, looking through them, smiling, and you could see all this, like the whole shot behind them. And man, I was just like, that is the just it's a crazy, crazy thing. And then Kango messaged me a couple weeks later. He's like, "Oh my gosh, we love these. Like, do you have the rest? Like, we really want to look through them. Can I buy them or can you send them to me?" And I was like, "Yeah, for sure, man." And so I think they have like 5 out of the 6 magazines so far, and it's so cool just to think that those guys, those people that really everybody kind of knows, everybody fishes their baits, everybody knows the baits that they take. Like they enjoy looking through my magazine or they enjoy displaying your artwork 4,000 miles across the world. It's just such a cool, it's a crazy, crazy experience or crazy, crazy feeling to have that somebody enjoys your work that much.
Yeah, it's definitely trippy because like when you first start doing it, like like oh like my intention is not to like mail this to Japan and like
Yeah.
give it to these people and just if it happens like that and I don't know it's really just an honor that you get it in front of them and then that they're stoked on it. I don't know, it means a lot.
Yeah, it's always it's even like it's crazy when guys in the US really enjoy your work. That's super cool. But like when you get a message from somebody in Germany or in Japan or France, wherever, you get a message from a foreign country and they're like, "Hey, do you ship internationally?" It's kind of like, "Whoa," like it makes you realize the reach that social media has and kind of that your work has been displayed somewhere, whether it's somebody like you said that tagged you in a post or whatever it may be, they saw it on their Discover page, that they see your work and they want it and they want you to ship it across the country. That's a pretty crazy feeling in itself too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's always cool like sometimes when like I get an order and I see them and I recognize who like the swim bait maker is or like who the person is and I'm like, wow, like I can't believe they bought one of these prints. Like this is so cool, you know?
Yeah, man, that's so cool. So was Caesar the first because I just keep referring to Caesar because he's the one that I remember seeing the most pictures and stuff from. Was he the first builder that you had done like his swim bait for and like his blueprints of bait building?
Yeah. He bought like my first poster and some other prints and then he messaged me and he was like, "Hey, like, I really love this poster and the way that like you broke everything down, like, and would you be interested in maybe doing a collaboration and a similar poster but with one of my baits?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, like that'd be
Yeah.
awesome." So I love Caesar. He's like really great to work with. Like, not only is he like a genuine person, but he has like a different level of respect for like design and art where
100%.
he like gives you direction. Like he's, specific, like, hey, this is what I want.
Mhm.
But then in the same breath, he's like, all right, I just want to see what you come up with.
Yeah.
And it's really rare just in design or just even art where when you're doing a project like that, where maybe there's zero revisions, like I'll send him a file and he's like, nailed it, like stoked on it, like send me the file, I'm gonna print it. I'm like, no revisions? Like,
Yeah.
dude, sick. So like now that I know like, how he works, I spend more hours and more time up front getting it as perfect as possible
Mhm.
the way I would like it. And then I know that like, you know, there'll be like maybe a little tweak here or there, but he doesn't touch the art that much. He just really lets me run with stuff. And I feel like that's awesome when you're collaborating with someone that they give you that much creative freedom. It's really rare.
Yeah.
So
It's like you guys are kind of on the same brainwave. He gives you his base layer and you just take it and run with it, and you kind of know his style, and like if you worked with him previously, you know what he kind of likes, what your stuff has looked like previously, and you can just kind of branch off it and maybe add some flair here and there. But you know that if it looks good to you and you send it over to him, there's a pretty good chance that he's going to be pretty stoked about it.
yeah, yeah, it's awesome collaborating with him. He's a really solid human being. And yeah, I mean for that project, he just photographed in the shop. He's like, hey, these are the tools that I use that we use like most commonly in the shop. So he sent me all the photographs, and then my process with that poster was I just do all the drawings in Illustrator first, and then I'll take like one element, like his swim bait, and I'll make that the main hierarchy or the main like focal point. I blow it up big. And then I just work and scale the other tools and other elements, around it on like the sheet. So
Man, that's awesome. So, so that was a run you guys did shirts and prints for, right?
yeah, you know, I mean, like going back to that also, he was like, hey, like I'm doing this run of shirts. He owns the graphic. He could do whatever he wants with it, stickers. And but he still was like super cool to me. He was like, hey, if you want to screen print this poster design and sell it on your website, like that's all you.
Yeah,
And
that's
you could
awesome.
take all the profit from it. Like I don't, it's all you. And I was like, wow, that's so sick that, he's allowing me to like, make prints of this, sell it on my website, and then he does all his t-shirt stuff. It's super cool.
And that's so cool. Yeah, he's like, I'm not gonna make posters of it. You have all the resources to do it. Why would I not why would I not allow you or give you the opportunity to do that? That's so cool.
Yeah.
Um, So the screen printing thing, I kind of talked about it earlier. So for guys who don't know the whole screen printing process, that's the process of, you guys have probably seen videos of it where there's those big, huge arms that people pull them down on the shirts, and they have those big wooden squeegee things, and they pour the ink and they spread it out onto the shirt, and then they put it underneath the heater, all that good stuff. But what people don't know is like the process that goes into making those screens. Like it's really interesting. I kind of understand it. I've watched a bunch of videos on like how to make your own screens and stuff. And you said like that's all stuff you do like at your own place, right? Like you burn all your screens and everything and wash them and stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll give a real crash course, in it. So in Illustrator, to make the film, everything has to be 100% black and white. You can't have any color, anything in it. So like, if you have a design that's two color, every color has to be separated into a separate layer. So if you had like a black layer that's like your outline and then green underneath, then you just have two pieces of separate film, and you print each color individually. But the screen, we use what's called a photosensitive emulsion, and you coat the screen in a dark room with that emulsion, and you let it dry for, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours. And then I have like a light box, and then I take the film and I put the screen with that light sensitive emulsion, and then you expose it anywhere from 30 seconds to maybe 45 seconds. And what happens is when the light comes up, it can't get through the black artwork and it bounces off. But then the emulsion is photosensitive. So, everything that the light can't get through, it hardens that emulsion.
Okay.
And if you think of it, it's basically like if you want to do like an old school spray paint stencil,
Yeah.
and you just cut with an X-Acto blade a stencil and then you spray painted it. It's basically the same thing,
Yeah.
but it's photographic. It's a little bit more detailed.
Mm, that makes a lot of sense. I thought
Yeah.
it was reversed. I thought that the screen was hardened, and then whenever you do the light stuff, I thought that it burned the design into it. It's doing the opposite. Okay, that makes a
Right.
lot more sense
Yeah.
now.
So once you expose it, the light goes through the clear film,
Mhm.
but then the black area bounces off. So that emulsion stays soft.
Yep, yeah.
And we
And
just
that's
take
why
it
you
over to,
wash it, right?
yeah, you take it over to sink, and then with a regular garden hose, you hit the screen, and then where the black artwork was and the light couldn't get through, the emulsion just washes out and it's clear. And that creates your stencil.
Okay, that makes so much more sense now. I understand the process now. I always wondered
Yeah.
how that worked, and I never like looked into it too much.
Yeah. And then there's um a bunch of different screens. If you think of like photography, it has like resolution, like the dots per inch, and
Yep.
like 300 dots per inch will give you a crisper image. Internet screen 72 dots per inch is lower resolution. Well, the screens have different mesh counts.
Mm,
So a lower mesh count, like 100, is for like a solid block of ink going through like just a shape or a circle.
yeah.
And then if you're wanting to do like a detailed illustration that has a lot of like line work, you do a higher mesh, like a 200 or a 250, and that will hold the line weight when you actually
Okay.
print. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that makes sense. So that's why like a lot of your stuff, like your posters are the black and gold, right? Because it's just two-tone. You can do it, you can burn the screens really easy, black and white, and it's just super easy to print on.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And, you know, I do sometimes two color, three color, just kind of depends, a lot of times if the design has like enough detail and there's enough interesting, elements in it, it doesn't necessarily have to have a second or a third color.
Yeah.
Um, but if it's a simpler design, sometimes I'll do a base color, then add a second color on top.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. So when you do that on a poster, you just put the poster board down, put the screen over it, and do the paint with the big squeegee or with the big
Yep.
whatever
Yeah.
you
And the
call it.
cool thing is you can buy like different, inks, like things that you can't do with like a inkjet or traditional printers. Like you can get metallic gold or a metallic silver or copper ink that has like reflective qualities in it.
Yeah.
And you can print that on like a black paper. And like when you see the print in person, like you hold it in the light, like it's tactile because the ink is raised, and then second, you can really see the shimmer of it. So I know. I think that's sometimes the advantage of screen printing is that you can get some different effects that you really can't get with just a traditional like color inkjet printer.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so cool. So when did you, I guess, were you doing that prior to doing like the swim bait art and stuff, or did you have experience doing it prior to like working with Caesar and doing the other designs you've done?
Yeah, I've been screen printing for a long time, probably like 15 years or so. So I mean, the big thing with me with my brand and keeping it small is that, um, I mean, and you're probably aware of this, is that sometimes you have an idea for a design, and if you outsource it to have shirts made, most places like their minimum is like 72 shirts.
Hmm.
Like they have minimums of embroidery you have to do. You're like, I don't really want 300 of these hats, but
Yeah.
that's the lowest amount they'll do,
Yeah.
And but for me, with screen printing is like I'll get an idea, I'll make the screen, I'll print it myself, and maybe I'll do like, let's say I'm doing a t-shirt run,
Mhm.
I'll do maybe a handful, 5 or 6 larges, a few XL, a few mediums, and then I'll post it. And if it sells really well, I save the screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I don't have like back inventory or stock. And
Mhm.
if it does well, then and I start noticing that people are buying it or buying a certain size, then I'll just print more of that size.
Yeah.
If the design just flops and doesn't do well, then like no big deal. I didn't
Yeah.
order like 100 of them. So I kind of do the same thing with like the posters. It gives me, as like a small brand, because I'm able to do everything myself.
That's so nice. That's so
It's
cool.
like a little bit more work, but on the back end, I don't have to pay as much money because
Yeah.
I'm doing everything all the time. All I have to do is pay for paper, which is not that expensive.
Mhm.
And then the time for making the screen and printing, but I enjoy doing that anyway.
Mhm.
And then I can just experiment, do a small run. If people are into it, cool. If not, like that's fine, you know.
Yeah, and excuse me, you can, like you said, if you sell out your shirts, but there's not much movement, it takes a little while to sell. You can throw that screen on a shelf, and in 2 years, if there's a big group of people that are like, hey, we want this design, blow it off, blow the dust off, and you print a couple more, and you just put it back on the shelf. It's really cool. I didn't really even think about that, that it's you can just keep a library of screens, and whenever somebody wants one, if it's a one-off or if somebody wants a design from 2, 3 years ago, you just pull it out, print it, and send it on its way. It's kind of a really cool thing of not screwing yourself over with ordering huge batches and maybe not meeting the demand you thought you were going to have for it.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. So, I used to print higher volume and higher numbers, and then I just realized that I was just sitting on a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
and it was easier for me just to print, a few different colors, a few sizes, and then just wait and just see how it did. And then, I have all the blank shirts in stock. Like I just have them in boxes. And then if it does well, cool. If not, then, I can use that, you know, blank black shirt for another design.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly. It's so convenient. Last question about like the design and stuff, or at least the last big question, and then kind of wrapping it up with the calico fishing stuff. What's it been like to be able to share your love for like the design and craftsmanship with the other guys in the fishing scene? I guess that's the first part of the question. What's that whole like being able to expose yourself to the scene been like?
yeah, it's been really cool. I mean, I was invited this year to the Cast and Crank that toy drive they did, and I was able to set up I think it was around right before Christmas where they have invite a bunch of like swim bait makers, and I ended up having like a booth for that. And it was just really interesting because there's so many people that you meet on social media, like, and you've never met in person.
Mhm.
So it was really cool to go to an event and, connect with all these people that you've been talking to for years in person, and meet with them. I met, I think the night before when I drove up there, I'd never met Matt from 86 Baits,
Mm.
and it was just cool to get to talk to these different swim bait makers and get introduced to different people. So yeah, it was really cool to see all these people in person and from the scene.
Yeah, and that was the next question. Like, what has it been like to get to work with guys like Caesar or LDC and kind of display your work to their people that follow them and enjoy their work? Have you seen, like you kind of talked about it before, like an uptick of people following your page or buying your stuff because it gets kind of spotlighted on these other guys' pages?
Yeah, it definitely helps where there'll be a handful of people that um maybe didn't know who the brand was or what you did. And then all of a sudden realize they start connecting the dots. They're like, oh, like, yeah, your artwork reminds me of this. Or like, I'm like, oh, I did that. And I've been working with that person, and it just gets your work in front of a whole different, group of people. Yeah, Ben from Lowdown Customs, like that was another one where I was like super stoked.
Yeah,
When he contacted me, he was like, "Hey, I have a new rod coming out this year." This is, a few months ago before the standard issue came out,
mhm,
and he was like in Japan, I mean, he came to me and was, "Hey, when I mail these rods out, I want to put a little 4x6 card, inside each one."
yeah,
And his thing was that, you know, in Japan, they're really familiar with the two-piece rods,
mhm,
like, and but in the States, um, people aren't as familiar with it. And when he sent out a bunch of samples and people were fishing them, a lot of people didn't realize like how to put them
Yeah,
together,
press and
or
turn and stuff.
yeah, how to press and turn them together, and like the way stuff lined up. And he was just envisioning like there was gonna be some problems.
Hmm.
So it's like, I like the infographic stuff that you do. Like, what if we were to put a card with each rod that explained, how to put it together,
Yeah.
how to, twist it, the correct way. So it was really cool to get to work with him on that project too.
Man, that is so cool. That's such a cool idea, and it's cool that he was like, okay, Scott knows what he's doing with the whole like design layout. I don't know, your artwork, like you could look at the Caesar one, the Toxic Bait one, and being like, oh, Caesar could give me the components, and I know how to put this thing together. And I mean, that's like the perfect translation to, oh, I just got this two-piece rod. How do I fish it? Oh, there's this infographic card right here. I can't read. I like following pictures. Boom. I can put this rod together and fish it successfully. I mean, your artwork is perfect for that. It's kind of crazy how perfect that fits.
Yeah. And he had talked too, because, he was selling a lot of them in Japan, and we're like, do we need to like translate this
Yeah.
and into Japanese? And we're kind of almost about to do it. And then we looked at it, and it's almost like some of the graphics, the advantage to that is that it's almost like international signage. Like if you're
100%.
in an airport and you don't speak the language, you understand like, oh, here's the exit and bathroom and food court, and it's all symbol based.
Yeah.
So we were like, if we can get this to work and it's graphic enough, even though there's some text underneath it, people could figure it out in whatever language.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed working with Ben. Like, I mean, the cool thing too is that you get to talk to these people for hours on the phone.
Hmm.
Like one about the project, but then, after you figure out like, all right, here's the revisions, maybe another half hour where you get to like know the person. And
Yeah.
like, I don't know, all these like Caesar's really fun to work with. Ben was great working with. I don't know if you've ever talked with Mike Gilbert before.
Oh,
He's
oh yeah.
he's I mean, it was just great. I mean, just to get on the phone with some of these people and like, talk about a project or talk shop.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's fun to get on a call with Mike, and then it starts off as an interview, and then 2 hours later it's him talking about a bite he's on and why he's fishing it the way he is. I mean, it's so cool, and like you said, you get to learn who these guys are, and I mean, really, like you get to become good friends with them because you're like you have a relationship with them on the phone and kind of working with them. It's always super cool. Um, so outside of the design work, we talked about way back at the beginning, we talked about the calico and like the kelp patches and stuff. And what you're doing right now, the last couple cast sketches you've posted, and even the last couple illustrations you've posted, like with the drifts that you like where you position the boat and where your cast is, and kind of all that stuff has kind of been like the last probably about 2 weeks. Like when I see your stuff, that's what it is. And your stories and everything are all related to that too. I guess so these like if you guys aren't familiar and haven't been following Scott, he's posted pictures of these huge like what you would look at and you would think are just flats, but it's more or less just these huge vegetation like mats, right? More or less that's what they are.
Yeah, so like the kelp forest, I mean, it's inshore, so like you go in the ocean, you're just, around like the point. And the kelp, it can grow as shallow as, 20, 30 feet. And then after 90 feet, it like stops, the light can't get down, it can't root as well.
Yeah.
So it's pretty inshore. And it's almost like the analogy of like in Florida, like, hydrilla, like
Hmm.
fishing that, like what
Yeah.
Keith does down there, where
Yeah.
like,
Like with the big mats.
you're fishing over like this hydrilla, but it's just the kelp forest. It's the same idea and concept where um we have like a heavy kelp forest with these stringers, and then in between the stringers there'll be just lanes, like clear water, or on the outside edge. And I just nose my boat up to a kelp stringer and then kill the engine, and then just like you were fishing like a long dock with a glide bait, I'll cast, parallel, do a long cast, and then just weave the glide in and out of that kelp stringer.
So cool.
And then the bass, they hide underneath that canopy like it was a dock.
Hmm.
And then they'll come out of that canopy and either start following it like a largemouth, or certain days, like with whatever retrieve speed, they'll just crush it. Yeah, it's super fun.
Man, one thing like you're describing this and what's sticking out, like have you fished any of the Swimbait Republic glide weight stuff at all?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, so like when you can get it to one-way glide, like you could get that underneath some mats. Like that's like my dream to fish that bait, like around huge floating docks and be able to work it way back there where these fish have never seen glide baits before. But by the sounds of it, like your fish keying onto the glide bait and they just have no sense or another that it's a bait that's gonna rip them back to the boat by the sounds of it.
Yeah. Um, I think that, I mean, as far as calico bass, they're really similar as far as their behavior to smallmouth bass.
Okay.
They're very aggressive when they're feeding on the top water, and they're also super powerful.
Mhm.
Like, in my eyes, I feel like the calico bass, I think maybe because they're in open current, they're in the ocean, and they're just built a little bit, they have a little bit more power just from having to swim against current and tides. But when you hook, these calico bass, like they are just raw power.
Yeah.
So they're super fun yeah, to fish for. And the DRT, both the K9 and the TK, like, that bait is super fun to fish them with. I kind of fish it. You can get them in the glide mode, but my favorite way, I love, fishing it with the wide lip with the V tail in,
Oh, yeah.
where I'll do a long cast and I'll burn it where I'll crank it as fast as I can and then pause it and
Mhm.
then dead walk it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
man, it just really gets them going.
Dang, man, that sounds like such a blast. I knew calico were like pissed off. I mean, it's an ocean fish; they're gonna fight hard. But I remember Marshall, the homeless fisherman, had posted a video a couple of years ago, and he was fishing like one of the walls with the lateral vision guys. And Marshall hooked one on a spinner bait or on a chatterbait, whatever it was. And this thing is just dogging him. And he gets it up to the boat, and it was like a 15-inch fish. And I like at that point in time, I was like, that is so crazy. Now I know why these guys catch calico and why they don't go back to fishing like freshwater as much because those things just got a little jet on their tail and they just slap your bait and they just want to go down to the bottom of the ocean. It's crazy how feisty those little things are. And even the big
Yeah.
ones. I mean, I've seen videos of the big ones just absolute dog guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're an interesting fish in the sense that, I mean, a little bit of background on the calico for people that aren't familiar with them. They're one of those fish that are like really slow growing.
Mm.
So like a 14-inch calico bass, it takes 5 years to grow that big.
Yeah, so it's like a smallmouth. That's crazy.
Right. Yeah. And then an 18-inch calico bass on average is around 10 years old. So, to get a 10-pound like calico bass is like really rare. And if you
Yeah.
do, I mean, same with like largemouth. I mean, it's definitely a trophy. I think the current world record calico bass is like 14 pounds, 7 ounce.
Oh,
And I think that was caught in like 1993 at a Newport Beach. And I mean, I couldn't even imagine like a 14-pound calico, like
that's
the
crazy.
fight that would put up. But
Yeah. I know like
yeah,
a like 5 to 7 pound calico is like a very, very large fish. Like
yeah,
Nick always talks about like, oh, this guy's caught a couple 10 pounders and it's crazy that I mean it's kind of like largemouth fishing, but I feel like largemouth fishing is a little bit different than what it used to be to say 10 pounder. But like, man, you always see guys posting like 15, 16-inch fish and guys like in the Midwest or guys on the East Coast, like look at those fish and you're like, why are they posting that fish? But just the fact that that fish is 9, 10 years old, it's crazy to think about that. Because you think of
yeah,
saltwater and you just think of fish that just indulge on food all day and just get super huge and super easy to catch. But that's not really the case with these guys.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they're definitely a challenge to get them on like a glide and on these bigger swim baits. Because I mean, one of the biggest challenges is that, I mean, where I fish for them in the kelp forest is they're in heavy, deep cover. So, I mean, as soon as you hook them, and if you hook a good fish, I mean, you're inches away from the kelp stringer, and they could just run into that right back into that kelp, and you're done. You know,
Yeah.
like you can't get them out, or they'll break you off. So it's definitely a challenge. You know, once you actually hook them, and you have to be, you know, if you're fishing open water, like they swim out there, but I mean, the closer you are to that structure, just like any, you know, swim bait, like the better your chances are. So yeah, it's really fun fishing for him with that.
Man, that's awesome. So say you and I are going out tomorrow. I'm heading out there and I'm like, "Hey Scott, what do I need to pack? Like what's the setup I need to bring?" Kind of modeling after yours. What are you going out there with and what do you recommend for fishing the kelp forest for these calicos?
Um, I mean, currently right now, you know, I fish as far as line, I do braid to leader because of the kelp.
Mhm.
Um, where if I get into the kelp, the braid just cuts right through it.
Okay.
So on most of my stuff, I'm doing 15 or 17 pound fluorocarbon.
Whoa, that's a lot less than I thought you were gonna say.
Yeah, I do really light line.
Okay.
Um, I don't go above 20. I think on my K9, I'll do 20-pound fluorocarbon, but um, I just found the action just to be a little bit better with 15-pound or
Yeah.
17, and maybe to like 30 or 25-pound fluorocarbon, or sorry, braid.
Right.
Um, and then um, right now, like my favorite rod I just really love is the medium light or medium heavy, you know, low down, either standard issue or like the regular, you know, white label one.
Okay.
And then, you know, any 200 size, I have like sometimes I'll fish like the Daiwa Tatula.
Mhm.
The 200 size works really well. I really like that. I have my favorite reel is the Daiwa Ryoga,
Yep.
uh, that round one. But I like a little bit more of the lighter rod, even though like they're super powerful. I mean, it's stuff that guys have been saying in the swim bait world forever. Just when you're fishing treble bait hooks, just I found that the lighter, more parabolic, it just keeps them pinned.
Yeah.
You know? But that's my favorite. I mean, as far as baits go, um, I always have like one rod that has like a glide bait on it. I have like a crank down, like a DRT, either the K9 or the TK. And then I always like to have like a swimmer on, like a triple trout or something like that, that can just burn really fast.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what I like switch between. Um, and then I don't know, like you, I'm just like you know, a swim bait lure junkie. Like, so like I have my go-to confidence
Yeah.
ones that I'll throw, and then, you know, I always are, you know, buying a new bait. So I always have one rod with my like, you know, new exciting, like,
Yeah.
all right, I'm gonna try and like throw this new one, you know, that or new for me, you
Yeah.
know. So I picked up this winter, um, you know, one of Matt's 86 baits, that glide. And I've been throwing that quite a bit and learning how that bait swims. And I hooked two really good ones this season so far, and I'm like stoked on that bait.
That's so cool, man. You know, I will say I am surprised with what you just laid out in front of us for your gear. I was expecting 80-pound braid to 40-pound leader. It's kind of crazy. You blew my mind and kind of turned my world upside down with what you said on the I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but it also makes you wonder like some of these guys, you know, here in Michigan or other, you know, wherever are fishing 25-pound fluoro for largemouth bass and stuff. It's just kind of funny to hear what you had to say and kind of think about how vicious your fish are compared to a pond or a lake largemouth bass.
Yeah, you know, I used to fish like 60-pound braid to 35 or 40-pound fluorocarbon
Mhm.
with my traditional, like, you know, lead head swim
Yeah,
bait when I fish for calico or those. Um, but when I switched to like swim bait fishing, I just got more bites and action in the bait, just swam better with a little bit of a lighter line. And honestly, like I haven't, I mean, knock on wood, I haven't broke off a fish that I hooked. Um, and even in like the bay, I've caught in, you know, 36-inch halibut on
wow.
15-pound fluorocarbon.
Yeah,
And like like no problem.
Mhm.
Like on a medium light rod, like, it took me a little bit to get it in or whatever, but it kept them pinned. And if you think about it, I mean, that's a 36-inch, fish.
Block of
And
muscle.
yeah, and it didn't break, that 15-pound fluorocarbon. So once I realized that, I was like, all right, like, you know, these bass have power, but if a giant halibut's not going to snap me off, like I should be all right.
Right, yeah. Man, that's so cool. Uh, is there certain colors that you think calico eat better than others? Like you're kind of fishing that underground TKK9 lately. I've been seeing. Is there certain colors that you kind of lean towards or lean away from, or does it not really matter?
Um, no, when I was conventional fishing, for calico bass, they really like golden brown. So anything that has like a brownish gold to it. So when that new swim bait underground, that golden shiner came out, I was like, oh man, this is going to be a great bait. I can't remember on the DRT if it was like the new moon. Is that
Mm.
the gold one?
Uh, yeah, it's either that new moon or full. I think it's new moon would be black. Maybe it's the full moon.
Maybe it's the full moon. Yeah, that gold one,
Yeah.
that's the one that I did a lot of damage on like the other season. And then this year when that new SU color came out, that's like that color is really good.
Yeah, that like golden shiner, I think, or
That
whatever.
golden shiner color is really good. And then they also like for calico bass, they also react really well to like a turquoise, like a bluish green white, one also. Um, that's another good colorway but like anything that's gold and brown is my go-to.
Hmm.
Yeah, for
Interesting.
sure.
Interesting. I'm trying to think of any other questions. Is there any stuff that you were ready to talk about that we haven't touched on yet?
Um, Not too much. I mean, I know that you mentioned in one of your comments that you're like getting more into like media-based stuff,
Yeah. Yep.
where you're kind of taking the brand where it's not just, which I thought was interesting that you were doing, where it's like, I'm not just a podcast, that I'm doing the podcast, I'm doing the magazine, I'm slowly getting into apparel, which I don't know. What are your thoughts like on what you're thinking of doing for the future?
So it's really just kind of putting out like more stuff into the world. So like the weekly reviews that I do of baits, or the overviews I should say, kind of getting my toes wet into the whole YouTube side of things with like a weekly video or a bi-weekly video, just kind of what it's like in the day of the life of me doing this sort of thing. And then really it's like getting more. I really want to get more into the photography side of things. I was really big into photography when I took a break from fishing, and I kind of want to bring that more into what I do. And it's kind of like, merch is an easy thing. I can go out and take pictures of hats and shirts and stuff and kind of put my own twist of things and kind of put my style and put my branding on like on the pictures I take and stuff. And now that it's starting to get a lot nicer out here, like I have a lot of ideas for videos, like underwater footage of bait swimming and like just just stuff that I can put out there that's not the podcast. If somebody doesn't want to listen to us ramble for an hour and a half, 2 hours, they can hop on and watch a YouTube video or scroll through Instagram. It's just more or less covering everything and just being a news outlet for anybody's preferred method of consuming media, I guess, is what the end goal is, or what the goal is right now, I should say.
Yeah, I think that's like super cool where, you don't, pigeonhole yourself into
Yeah.
just one, area inside there. And I think that's really cool too, where like, in this day and age, you could have a podcast, you could do like a YouTube channel, and like each different like platform, you could do different things.
Yeah.
Like, all right,
Yeah,
this one's
exactly.
doing reviews, and then, my photography could be more for showing product and swim videos, and I don't know, it makes it more well-rounded.
Yeah, yeah, and like it'll clear, like for anybody, if you've noticed, I haven't posted any fish pictures this year from like my trips on the Scales and Tails page, because it's not it's not about the fish I catch. You know, if I catch it on a bait, I talk about, yeah, I'll post it in one of the videos. But like that's more the YouTube side of things of like what's going on, what I'm up to. Hey, check this bait out. I'm gonna go fish with it for the day type thing. I want to keep the Instagram super clean for the memes I post, for the show episodes, and for the reels I do, and kind of that branding side of things. The YouTube is for, hey, we went on this week trip. Here's a bunch of cast to catch stuff. Not saying that I won't post cast to catches on Instagram and stuff, but I want it to be like it's your one-stop shop. You can jump on Instagram, you can go to the YouTube to do this, you can go to wherever else it, you know, whatever else I link on there. And I just kind of want the Instagram to be the main hub for everything, and kind of like the sign that you see with all the arrows pointing to the cities over here type thing. Like this is the direction you
Yeah.
want to go if this is what you want to see or consume next type thing.
Yeah, I think that's super cool, and I don't know, I feel like for as many people that like, hate on Instagram and social media, like for the stuff that we're doing, it's like to me, and I'm like, I wouldn't exist without it,
100%, dude.
and I mean, I love when I go out and fish, and I catch like a good fish, and I'm releasing that fish, like I get like stoked to come home and like, oh, I'm gonna check the video, and
Yeah.
like I love editing. I love like putting music to it and doing the graphics. So it's
Mhm.
like, I don't know, it like engages me in like a whole other side. And then I don't know, it's from like a branding standpoint, it's like, all right, the YouTube video for me, that kind of shows, the cast and catch and
Yep.
just, the fishing aspect. And then, my Instagram will have like, here's like a new design, or here's me screen printing and this, and then like links to like, other stuff. And I don't know, they just all work, hand in hand. So
Yeah, it's like I'm the type of guy who wants to have my hands in a bunch of cookie jars, and the best way to do that is make a media page where I can do graphic design, I can do the written media stuff, I can do page layouts, I can do videos and photography and everything all in one spot, and just, you know, the media thing just works too well. I feel like maybe there's not necessarily a gap in it in the swim bait world, but there's not I really haven't been able to find a page that does what I'm doing. Like it's mostly guys like reposting stuff or whatever. I want to be the guy who's making the stuff that gets posted, and making the, you know, that, oh, check this builder out, they're doing a drop next week, or check this guy out, or whatever it may be. I want to be like the hub for sharing cool stuff, and guys kind of feel like they need to follow to stay in the loop of what's happening on the other side of the country or what's happening on the other side of the world type stuff. I want to be like the CNN, the Fox of the swim bait world, pretty
yeah,
much.
yeah, yeah. There's I mean, I still follow a ton of skating stuff, and on Thrasher Magazine, their online, YouTube, they have a thing called Skate Line, and it's really short clips, but basically, that whole little video series that comes out like once a week, they just review all the skate videos that came out.
That's
And
sick.
it's super cool because like, and the guy's hilarious too. He's like super funny. Like he like, if you're wearing something stupid, he like makes fun of you, but like, in a good,
Yeah,
I mean, he's friends with
yeah,
everybody.
yeah.
So like, it's nothing like,
Pokes fun at everything.
yeah, yeah. But it's like, it's, if you think about like Thrasher Magazine, like, um, all these magazines just died,
Hmm.
like Trans World, Slap, everything, even like in the surf industry or most of them. Um, but Thrasher was smart, like they transitioned before everyone else.
Yeah.
And they created this, Thrasher YouTube channel. And now like everyone in the industry, they post all their videos
Hmm.
on their website, and then they still have the magazine, and then
Yeah.
they have their apparel side. um and like when they have something in the magazine, if it's a cover shot, they have the video of like all the tries.
That's sweet. Until
So
all
it's
the
super
takes
cool,
until,
like,
yeah.
and they have little sections like Buster Bale, or
Hmm.
different areas. So like you get to see like the static print magazine, and then you go online, you can click and see like the tries for the cover or whatever it would be. Um I think they did a really good job, with that, creating their media sense.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the YouTube series like oh, what is it called? Like everything's a remake or nothing. Oh, what is it? I can't remember the name of it, but it's essentially this guy saying like no idea now is original. It's just a morph of somebody else's idea. And so I'll send it to you once we're done. But I mean, that's like what it is. I don't know if you've ever heard the reason why I started the magazine, but it was literally because I was watching a Playboy documentary and I was just like, if this guy started doing this, like I could, like, there's no swimbait magazine, like I could start that. Like Hugh Hefner started this thing, and it kind of was modeled after like the Esquire Playboy Thrasher style. And I was like, I just want it to be this one-stop shop, like this thing that if you're reading a magazine about swimbait fishing, it's the Scales and Tails one. And that's kind of what it all had branched from. And now here we are today. And I will say that that the Thrasher online thing that you just talked about is a very, very good idea. I might have to figure out a way to kind of incorporate that into something I do.
Yeah, yeah, almost like the CNN, like you said, that they call it
Yeah.
skate line instead of Dateline. It's
Yeah.
called
Yeah.
skate line, like and it's just, yeah, like you said, it's a review of that week, or it could be every 2 weeks, which is super cool. And I don't know, I think the big thing about design is they talk about, like, in my classes, understanding who like your end audience is or who your user is, and
Yeah.
then like figuring out, like, where's the gap and like what are their wants and needs.
Yeah. There's I forget what it's called, but it's I have it actually probably in one of my other book or notebooks, but I literally when I first started Scales and Tails, I thought of who is the common person that's gonna consume my stuff, and I drew them, I wrote all their characteristics, I
Yeah.
like wrote what their interests were, and I'm like, okay, how can I touch all these emotions or all these wants and needs, keep it into the swim bait scene, keep it to the style I want, and keep it so I'm not like copying stuff that's already in the swim bait world, but maybe drawing inspiration from Thrasher, from whatever else is out there, the old style outdoor magazines. Like, what can I do to put my twist on this stuff and present it to this group of people that they're going to enjoy it and they're going to want to consume it every week for the podcast, every 3 months for the magazine, every week for the YouTube, that sort of thing. And it's really, really helped me kind of narrow stuff down, brainstorm good ideas and throw away the ideas that I don't think would stick or would be efficient to put my time into.
Yeah, I mean, because if you create, like, they call them like a persona, like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
typical user, if you know if for some reason the swim bait industry, there were like 10 different swim bait magazines, like, and it's so super saturated, it's like, what would you be doing different with a swim bait magazine that you're putting out that someone else already has? But then, like Nick, you mentioned, it's like, well, there's a lack. There's no, swim bait magazine specific out there for it. You know what I mean? So it's like, all right, cool. Like, if I was to do this, like, I would be unique in that sense, and I'm not competing with all these other people, and my audience would definitely be into it. So yeah,
100%, man. Yeah,
yeah.
it's more like I learned something, like I learn a design technique, I learned, whatever it may be, a new form of media. And it's like, okay, how can I incorporate that to what I'm doing here? Like, how can I put a Scales and Tails twist on it to make it so guys like you and I on the outside would see it and be like, oh, I can't wait till he posts this again, or I can't wait till he does another version of this, or whatever it may be. And that's kind of the magazine and just some other stuff that I've been working on, which I'm super, super excited about.
Yeah, yeah, I totally dig it, and I think that's where I got lucky in a sense, was that there just wasn't that many people screen printing,
Yeah.
you know, a poster on, like, swim bait only stuff.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So I got lucky in the sense that some of those were early on, like my swim bait painter one, like and the others. So, and like that magazine you do is great. So
Heck yeah, man. I appreciate it. So, where can the people follow you? You have a YouTube and an Instagram too, right? Is there anything else that we can link or that you can shout out for people to follow you on?
that's mainly the main stuff, would be, my Instagram, and my YouTube channel. And on my Instagram, I put together, like, it's got like a little link tree. So on there, when you click on the link tree, it's basically three little areas: YouTube for watch, and then it has my Etsy market, if you
Oh,
wanted to like buy a poster or a t-shirt. And then it's got a link to my YouTube channel.
heck yeah. What's the Instagram and what's the YouTube channel?
Um, my Instagram is Bows, the letter N, arrows, 43. My YouTube channel, I mean, I can't remember the actual name. If you just typed in Bowsnarrows, it'll link right to it. So
Perfect. As always,
yeah.
I'll put all of Scott's stuff in the show notes. You guys can just go down there and copy and paste it in, or just press it for his Etsy link and his YouTube link. His Instagram, I'll have to type out, and you guys can just copy and paste that. Dude, this was a lot of fun. I had expressed to you how much fun I have talking to creative guys and talking to creatives about like their process, how they got into stuff, and kind of what they do to put a twist on what they produce in the swim bait market. It's really cool. And what you do is really cool because, like you said, it's stuff that nobody else does. I always say that right now is the Renaissance time in the swim bait world, and I mean you're doing what the Renaissance time kind of entailed. You're making the cool art, you're screen printing it, you're selling posters and stuff, and that's just something that I think is so badass. And I wanted to hear your story, and I wanted to hear kind of how it all started and what it's been like to get the exposure and to build it and to see people kind of interact with your artwork. I mean, I really wanted to hear that, and I wanted other people to hear it too, because I feel like it's just cool to see this artwork is cool, but to hear the story behind it is just that much cooler.
Yeah, I really appreciate you reaching out, and I'm super stoked that the swim bait community has been, very receptive. Everyone's been super cool. I'm just blown away every time I meet people like, like Chris Purcell from Swim Bait Underground has been like so kind to me and just helped me, and people you could like have an idea and talk to on the phone, or like, have lunch with, and I don't know, it's been really great.
Heck yeah, man. That's so awesome. Well, Scott, I want to thank you for coming on, man. Like I said, it was super fun. And as always, I'll have all Scott's stuff in the show notes. You guys can go follow him if you're not already. Pick up a print from the Etsy shop or subscribe to his YouTube and follow him on Instagram if you guys aren't already. As always, make sure you're following the podcast or the I say podcast. Make sure you're following the media page on Instagram, scales and tails underscore media on Instagram, and then scales and tails. I think it's just scales and tails on YouTube. We're gonna start doing the weekly videos, so you guys can go check that out as well. While you guys are listening to this, there might be some shirts on the website. You guys go pick those up if you want. The hats will definitely be sold out. We'll be doing another run of hats soon with a couple different varieties. So keep your eyes out, or keep your eyes open for that, I should say. And again, I want to thank you guys for listening. Scott, thank you for coming on, man. It was a lot of fun. I had a good time talking. I'm glad we got to experience, or glad we got to hear what your experiences are and kind of how you got into this whole ordeal, I guess is what we'll say.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I love talking design, and yeah, it was a good conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And like I said, all Scott's stuff will be in the show notes. You guys go follow him if you're not already. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you guys next time. See you guys.